Hello and welcome to this video in which we are going to discuss 3 tips that you might have overlooked while preparing for the FE Electrical and Computer exam. There is no doubt that the FE Electrical and Computer exam is a race against time. You have 110 questions that need to be dealt within 5 hours and 20 minutes. This roughly translates into 3 minutes per question. Now, if you take about 30 seconds on average to read a question, another 30 seconds to formulate how you're going to respond to it, 30 seconds for the calculation, 30 seconds for checking your work, and then selecting an option, you're literally at the edge of the 3-minute mark. So what can we do in order to save time and make use of our time more efficiently on the exam? Well, the most obvious thing that you should be doing is getting an in-depth understanding of the content and doing lots and lots of practice, because once you have a sound theoretical understanding, you can tackle any problem, whether it is an easy problem, whether it's thrown from this angle or that angle. You can deal with all the curveballs, okay? And by practicing more and more, you will become more proficient. So these are the obvious strategies that you have to make use of while preparing for the exam. That is in-depth understanding of the content and lots of practice. But in this video, we're going to discuss 3 probably overlooked or underused strategies and tips that can pay dividends during the exam and help you save a lot of time during the exam. The first tip that I'm going to share with you is to know your calculator inside out. Now, I know that when you get started with FE exam preparation, learning the content is probably at the top of your list, and it should rightly be so, because without knowing the content for the exam, you really wouldn't be able to go any further, right? And that's where bulk of your focus, attention, energy, and time should be spent. That is learning the content, the 17 sections of the specification, and dozens of topics within the overall curriculum or the specification for FE Electrical and Computer exam. But knowing your calculator inside out is something that gets overlooked too often. Students feel that the calculator is there only to do big multiplications and divisions and additions and subtractions and maybe calculating the logarithm or exponents. That's it. Or taking the square roots. Your calculators, the list of approved calculators that NCEES has put together, it includes your Casios, your HPs, your Texas Instruments, and I will include a link of all the approved calculators. You can actually, that's provided by NCEES. You can click on that link and look at that list. But here's the takeaway. You should know your calculator features as they relate to your FE Electrical and Computer exam inside out. So let's say you choose Casio. So make sure to download the Casio manual, or if you're buying it from Staples or Walmart or Amazon or wherever, then take some time to read through it. And you can also find a lot of helpful tips and videos online as well that can teach you step by step different features of your calculator. Now, based on my personal experience and understanding, I would say that some of the key features that you should know obviously are how to calculate the logarithms, very good understanding of matrices, because it can save you a lot of time, and you can use the calculator also as a second check. The stats problems, so calculating the mean, calculating the deviations, and when it comes to complex numbers, converting from rectangular to polar and from polar to rectangular, that is also a big one. And when it comes to digital systems, changing bases, so going from binary to hexa to octa. So all of those things can be done by hand as well, but doing it by calculator will save you a lot of time. So again, the takeaway is that whichever calculator you decide to use, allocate at least 1 hour of your time at the beginning of your studies. So you're embarking upon this project of FE Electrical and Computer exam preparation. So I think you can afford at least 1 hour out of dozens or hundreds of hours that you're going to spend while preparing the exam. If you set aside 1 hour or maybe even just 2 hours, then you'll see that that investment of time will pay dividends during your exam preparation and also during the exam day. The second tip is to develop familiarity with NCEES FE Reference Handbook. NCEES FE Reference Handbook is the only reference material that you will be allowed to refer to during the exam. On one half, you will have the NCEES FE Reference Handbook, and on the other screen, you will have the actual exam. Now, NCEES FE Reference Handbook for Electrical and Computer Engineering exam, it contains details in several places. Bulk of the details are contained in electrical and computer engineering section. Then obviously you have the math section, you have the general section in terms of probability and stats, engineering economics, ethics, and some details in controls as well. So it's sort of scattered a little bit. I would say 70 or 80% is in electrical and computer, and the remaining 30, 35 or 40% is in the remaining sections that I just mentioned. Now, how can your familiarity with the handbook help you save time on the exam? Well, it's pretty obvious, because if you don't have to spend a lot of time going back and forth between different sections within the NCEES FE Reference Handbook, and if you know roughly where the formula or where the information is that you're looking at, then you will save that overhead time. Now, a lot of students actually prefer using Control F feature because they think it's a PDF and you can easily do a Control F, but I always recommend students to make use of bookmarks as much as possible, because if you are using bookmarks, you will be able to navigate through sections, and once you're in one section, chances are that you will be very quickly be able to find the detail. The downside of using Control F, unless it's a very unique or specific term or formula that you're looking for, is that sometimes it can result in, and most of the times it will result in, multiple options, and then you have to scroll through it, and that can sort of build up frustration and anxiety if you're not finding what you're looking for. But if you're using the bookmarks, you can, and using bookmarks actually requires a lot of familiarity with the handbook, so it goes hand in hand. So the more familiar you are with the handbook, the more comfortable you will be using the bookmarks. But regardless of your approach, the key message or key takeaway over here is that if you have a good understanding and familiarity with the handbook, you will be a lot more calm and a lot more composed during the exam, because you would know that, okay, this particular resource that I'm provided, I know it inside out. Okay, and obviously knowing your content, as I said, 90 or 95 or even 98% of your time should be spent on knowing the content. And if you combine that knowing the content with the NCEES FE Reference Handbook, by making sure that everything that is in the handbook you understand, and you also know where to find it in the handbook, then it will put you in the driving seat. You will be a lot more confident, and you will be able to save a lot of time during the exam. And the third and final tip that can help you a lot on the exam day with your time and confidence is knowing the format. Now, as you know, FE Electrical and Computer exam is a computer-based exam. This transition happened back in 2014. Now, the fact remains that a lot of us still do most of our work or would have taken most of the exams in a paper and pencil based format. Although most of the standardized exams have almost completely transitioned to computer-based exam, but in universities, colleges, high schools, still a fair portion of the exams are pen and paper based. Now, since you are working with a very tight timeline on the day of exam, 3 minutes per question, the last thing that you need to worry about, or you should worry about, is figuring out how the interface is. Okay, so I would recommend you to check out the videos that NCEES has that explain you how the computer-based format is, and so that you can develop familiarity with the interface. I've also developed computer-based, computer-simulated practice exams that you can find helpful in order to develop familiarity. But if you know how to navigate between the questions, and it's very intuitive. A lot of us use computer for several hours a day these days, so it's fairly simple and straightforward. So the ability to flag the questions, I would say, is a great feature. Navigating back and forth is a great feature. Knowing that some of the problems can have multiple answers, so be sure to check multiple boxes if you think that there's a correct answer, and then some drag and drop type alternative item type questions. So once you have familiarity with the format and know, okay, there's a timer that's being displayed, so you should know about it, and how to make your way through. Another tip that I can provide sort of related to the computer-based format is that you're working with 5 hours and 20 minutes, okay? When it comes to FE electrical and computer exam, and I'll probably have a separate video on this topic, but generally speaking, the first session or the morning session, a lot of students find it much easier than the second session. And that can be also because of the fact that some of the more general topics are in the first section, and the core electrical and computer topics are mostly concentrated in the second section. And the nature of those topics can be such that some students find them more difficult, and also because by the time you reach the second half of the exam, you're probably physically and mentally a little bit exhausted. So whatever the reason is, generally speaking, students find the second half to be more difficult and the first half to be more easier. So what you are given 5 hours and 20 minutes, okay, for the overall exam. Now let's say we have a 50-50 split between the number of questions that you get to see in the morning session and the number of questions that you get to see in the afternoon session. So if your strength is the morning session, if you're very good with math, engineering, economics, ethics, and a lot of those general topics, and even circuits, then you should not aim necessarily to complete the question in average of 3 minutes, but you should consider completing them in 2.5 minutes, or maybe even 2 minutes, so that you can complete the morning session in less than half of the total allocated time. Now that additional time that you have essentially can be made use of in the second half. So you can tackle the more difficult problems in a much more streamlined manner. Okay, you would have more time to think them through, you would have more time to strategize your solution, you would have more time to check your calculations. So if your strength is the morning session and several topics in the morning session, then try and complete them sooner so that you can donate some time into the second session. So when you combine all of these 3-4 tips that we've discussed, it can help you save a lot of time on the exam. So let's do a quick recap. We started with knowing your calculator, knowing the NCEES FE reference handbook, and becoming familiar with a computer-based format. And lastly, related to the last point, was managing your time such that you can give a little bit more time to the second session as compared to the first session. And you can only do that when you're really confident on your performance on the first session and you have quickly solved the problems, checked the answers, maybe double check the answers, and you've done your best. Okay, so when you combine all of these 3-4 tips, then you would be able to more efficiently manage your time on the exam. And every minute, every second counts on the exam. Giving yourself, let's say if you properly execute these strategies and if you're able to give yourself additional 15 minutes or even 10 minutes on the exam, that can be a game changer. That can be a difference between you passing and failing the exam, because those additional 10 minutes can be used to solve a much more difficult problem, or maybe even to double check some of the work that you've already done and find some silly mistakes that you might have made. So 10 minutes on this exam is a huge amount of time, and creating those 10 minutes for yourself by making use of these strategies can be a game changer. I hope you found this video helpful, and I would really appreciate if you could like this video and subscribe to this channel, in which I will be discussing more details about FE electrical and computer exam preparation, as well as PE power exam preparation. In future videos, we will have student interviews, we will discuss exam preparation strategies and tips, and also address frequently asked questions from students who are preparing for these exams.